Good evening, my friends, and welcome to Crow Chat on this cold night in January. I'm so glad you're with us tonight. I want to especially be able to say that tonight is a night that we're going to take a tough question from a regular listener here at Crow Chat. Our goal at Crow Chat is always to facilitate communication, good thinking. I hope that I can be a processor of some good thinking where we can grow personally, theologically, culturally, and tonight, especially philosophically and relationally in the experiences we share in this world. This is Crow Chat number 79, January 10th, 2022, and the question that was turned in for me was, hello Charlie, hello Ron, was how does a Christian approach moral and ethical issues in science and medicine? The exact question that I had turned in was this, and I'm going to read, it's more than a question. It says, we are starting to get really good at transplanting and replacing parts of the human body. Computer scientists are also making great strides in artificial intelligence and robotics, while doctors and medical researchers are learning more and more about the human genome. How should Christians view such advances from a moral, ethical, and religious perspective as the human species gets closer and closer to being able to replicate itself? Our belief is that God created humanity. But if instilling free will and powerful intellect in his children results in man creating man, how do we reconcile this apparent uncomfortable paradox? Now, I realize when we're doing this talk tonight that I have titled this talk poorly, because it's far greater than the title that I put onto our Crow Chat screen. We're talking about how faith functions in a technologically complex world. We are asking where and why does human capacity find limitations? We are talking about if we can do it, does that mean we should do it? If we can't do it, why not? Why would we not? That's where we come into some of the ethical and moral considerations. I would really appreciate your comments tonight and you bringing up any questions and comments. Because this is not a good soliloquy tonight for us to do. It'd be great to have a dialogue. I really wish we were on a Zoom tonight, really talking that way. But the question goes on, in this complexity of thinking, we realize just because we can do something, it's not just a matter of mere choice. The complexity asks the question, do we really have a choice? If we can, should we, must we? How many really of us make decisions based on our own thoughts and not the incredibly manipulative force of information that surrounds us? We are bombarded with information today, and it's because of this technological world that we live in, by and large. We not only go faster, we hear more, we see more, we maybe don't understand more clearly at times, but we are literally bombarded with an amount of information that influences our thinking. That's advertising is built upon that. And so what we find is that this life that is complex, it really comes at us in very many different ways. Advertisers know that if they put so many things in front of us, we will tend toward those things. I remember being in a drugstore when I was a child, a young boy. I was probably a young teenager. And I remembered they had ice cream cones hanging from the ceiling, shapes of ice cream cones, and it said, ice cream cone, 15 cents. And you just saw them, ice cream cone, 15, and they were just hanging, hundreds of them, from the roof of this drugstore. And when you got ready to check out, I remember the person I was with said, here's what I want, and I would like an ice cream cone. And they didn't go in there to get an ice cream cone. I was with the person, we talked about what we were going to get. But honestly, just the sheer suggestion and seeing that over and over, McDonald's has made millions of dollars by saying, you deserve a break today. And come on in with their latest ad. Life is complex, and I would say this, human life is very complex as well. And human life becomes more and more complex as our capacities are increased. Let me give you an illustration. Uh, it's not unusual for a family to ask a question, where do you want to go to eat? Where do we do dinner? As a kid in my hometown, let me tell you what choices we had. If we were going to go out and eat dinner, we had very few culinary options. There was no Thai food. There was no Indian. There was no Korean. There was no Ethiopian. There was no Greek. There's no French. You get the picture. I tell you what there was. There was Burger Chef. This predated the big golden arches. There was Two Manellas. There was the Glass Kitchen. And there was Maxwell's. Those were our choices. You didn't have any other choices, fast food or otherwise. Today, our options and reviews are all over the place. You want to know where to go eat? You just ask Siri. She'll tell you whatever you want, where the closest one is. Yelp gives you a review of that very place. Open Table tells you if you can get seating there. We are all over the place with technology that has grown to be a part of us. These things may be separate from us in one sense, but they're in our head and they're in our thinking at all times. We'll talk about that just a little bit more in a moment. We will not resolve this question tonight. And so I don't want to say who turned in the question, but his initials are Ron, and I will just go with that. But we're going to begin now to this question about medical issues, transplant, artificial intelligence, and robotics. These issues would include, well, we did discuss these. I'm going to just list a few. This would include egg harvesting. This would talk about the freezing of eggs, our embryos, our disposing of eggs that are frozen, and our embryos. I've had to have those talks with people in my office at times. What do we do? They feel a moral conundrum. Embryo implantation, artificial insemination, test tube babies, surrogacy, if somebody bears a child for another, gender selection. Do you get the test? Do you get the sonogram? Do you want to know the sex of your child? What Darwin would call natural selection has become unnatural selection, where parents can make a designer baby, as it were. They can get DNA sent. They can say, I want my baby like this. I want to have blue eyes, blonde hair. That to me, that's scary, creepy. Artificial wombs. I found out about this just a few months ago. They're called body bags. And a person in Philadelphia had that, but they're artificial womb so that a husband and wife can share the burden of the pregnancy, if you can imagine. Don't understand all that, but that's on the order now. There's genetic issues. There's cases for abortive procedures to be done or not to be done. There's implanted neural transmitters, and I think this is a wonderful thing as it works, if it does work the way they say it does. But it goes into someone's, they put them into your skull. It's a cranial device that can relieve acute and severe depression and anxiety. Matter of fact, one person had that done with him in one study I read, and they began to have recurrences of the depression after a few months having this neural transplant or implant. And they went to the doctor, and the doctor said, let's check it out. The battery was low in the transmitter. And then once they fixed that, the problem was solved again. Those could be very helpful to people. There's medicines and various treatments. There's end-of-life issues. There's euthanasia. Planning, one of the adverts I read just today, doing some research, it says, we want you to plan for a perfect, clean, and painless automated death. And they've got a casket you can get into, and what it says, you'll go into a euphoric state as oxygen is deprived from your body. Wow. There's do not resuscitate directives. There's, and here's one of my favorites, removing a defective aortic valve and being replaced by a pig valve or an artificial valve. Had that done. So medicine is a huge topic. So, we've got to narrow the focus somewhat to talk about it. And tonight, I said, we're not going to resolve this. We are just discussing here. Um, the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed this to the forefront as well. Do you use technology or you don't use it? Do you use a vaccine? Don't use a vaccine. Motivations of all this stuff is critical. We have seen in this vaccine development in our country, in our world, how it can save people in one sense. But here's the other thing. As we realize now, they say we're making billions off of this. And we have to ask ourselves the question, what is the motivation really to help people? For real? Or is it to make the most money? And therefore we get it out the fastest we can. All those things, they're wrapped up. And so we have to look and say, let's think about these things wisely. I wonder in some ways, did the various labs that made the vaccines, for which I'm grateful, and I personally have received a vax and a booster, I have to wonder, were their motives really clean on saying we're going to divert our attention to do this, or did they say this would be the biggest money-making opportunity ever? I know that some companies did do that, and they're not the ones that are doing the vaccines today, but they went into that. As a matter of fact, one company approached somebody that I know quite well to go to work for them, and they said if we do that, we're going to hit the jackpot at that point. So we have to ask the question. If we look at these different issues, I listed several areas that these touch. One is medicine and health. The other is technology. And we're not even talking tonight about virtual reality. Some of the things that Siri and Alexa do to us that we don't even realize. There's a whole idea on food. There's the idea of the genetically modified organisms. What a GMO? What does that do? And that goes all the way back into hybrids that Gregor Mendel did on making hybrid plants. And all these things we have to say: is there an effect here? There's birth and death issues that I've already mentioned, and then there's sexual issues. This idea that you can make a human partner. A robotic partner to take the place of a human partner, and it started out being a sexual novelty in one sense, but today it's about companionship, and you can have it to where your partner, your companion, will never disagree with you because they're programmed to your thinking. That's a whole dangerous pursuit that we'll talk about in some depth. But the question I have to ask is science out of moral control? And is science just out of control morally? Now that I want to make sure that you don't think I'm saying moral doesn't mean right or wrong. That's not what moral means. Moral means basically, does something relieve pain? Does it relieve suffering? Morality always relieves or reduces suffering, and it provides help. That's what the moral things, whatever God would say is right or wrong, if you do those things, they relieve suffering and they provide help. So that's important for us to separate the moral from the sense of divine, like a mandate. We've got to say moral thinking is that does not produce suffering. It relieves suffering, and it also produces help and gives help to those who have need. But is science out of moral control? I would say pretty much. Computers know us better than we know ourselves. I get prompters on this thing. It says you might like this music. If I go on and sign on to my computer, I will see something that comes in from one of the suppliers of goods on the internet, and it'll say you might like this product. I get prompts on the phone, laptop, and or the television that say you might like this new program that's come out. Now they know my patterns. They know what I like. They know what I've purchased in the past. They see those trends, and therefore I get suggestions on that. Now, when I see something and it's suggested to me to listen to music, here's the question. Is that really me exercising free will? Or am I being influenced and manipulated by an outside source? It's a huge question to ask. Even on when we decide where we're going to go eat. What is really influencing us? Is it an advertisement? Is it something we've seen? Is it curiosity? Or is it really something we want? I know that oftentimes we have free time, what we call my time, my free time. And we say, what am I going to do with my time? And we have so many suggestions that we don't really think about ourselves because we say, well, I'm going to go do this, and I'll do this, and I'll do this. And what we're doing things that were kind of programmed for us to do. So that's a moral implication that we really have to think about, do I ever really think anymore? Or am I just being manipulated by data that is coming in? And it's not meant to do harm. Most of it is driven by money. We cannot get away from that. Facebook got into big issues when, I think it's 2 years ago. It may have been in 19 when Zuckerberg came out and he says, "I want to people are disconnected. I want to make a way for people to connect." And his goal was to have 1 billion people connected because he says we've lost our connectivity. The painful underlying issue there is if you're connected on Facebook, it doesn't mean you're connected. What it means is you have some vague awareness. Now they can make it as personal as a picture or a thought, but here's the thing. To say that you have a friend and they are your friend, they're really not your friend. Now they may have been a friend at a point, but to say that you keep up with people and you have this many friends doesn't mean you really have a friend, because here's the thing you would ask. If I am sick, they may know you're sick on Facebook, but can they bring you a bowl of soup? Can they bring you some crackers or some medicine and drop by your house and do that? That's what friends do. Friends have a capacity to take care of one another. And so we have to ask ourselves different questions about this whole thing of the tech world that we're in. And Ron, I'm not trying to evade the question. We will come to that in our future Crow Chats as well, specifically on some of the ethical sides. But I want to touch on a few of those tonight, and I do want to do that. I'm going to give you a few thoughts. I want to give you 5 cautions first that we need to think when we're talking about this matter of how does a believer, how does a follower of Christ relate. Now, by the way, this is true for anybody, whether it's a Christian or not. But how do we relate to the AI world, the tech world, the virtual world, and as relating to the human body, how do we relate to that as far as robotics and those things go? Caution, just a few. Number 1, we can become dehumanized, so be cautious. We can become dehumanized very quickly. That's when you think you have a friend, but they're really not a friend. I'm aware of somebody I'm aware of more than one somebody. I know several people who have made friends online that have lost a lot of money. They've expended a lot of money onto a friend they've never met. I know that to have happened to men and women. It is not gender exclusive. It is not age bound. I've seen senior adults do that. I've seen teenagers do that. But those are things that we become very bad. You got to exercise that not to become dehumanized. Our desire to be human is to have connection with others and to have connection with God. And if we let the internet become our way of connecting, that's real dangerous at that point. An internet can lead to a good connection. It does not make a good connection. And by the way, I'm not against the dating, well, at least some of them. Some of them are pretty spurious at points. But the good dating sites, there's nothing wrong with that. I do a lot of weddings that people have met online. But they didn't stay online. They had to get together. So, number 1, don't be dehumanized. Number 2, don't become tech dependent. Tech dependency means we don't have time for conversation when we sit down with our loved ones or our friends at a restaurant. We're steadily looking at our phone. We're steadily hearing the bing. We're steadily feeling that rush, that endorphin that comes when we hit a like or we get a dislike, the anger we might feel or the hurt. We don't need to be disconnected at that point. It is sad for me, as I remember the days when I had 5 sons and we would sit around the table, and it took a big table to feed 5 of them, but it would be around and we would have times and discussions. And life was a little slower back then, but it was still very fast. My kids were, they were in the sports, so we did a lot of activities. But it was important, and one of the things that Becky led us to do that I just loved, we would do on Fridays when the kids were younger, we'd go do a pizza picnic on Friday. and we could get a pizza, and we could go out, and amazingly, they were young enough then we could eat one pizza, and it would work. But we would go out and we would just spend the day playing ball, doing a hike, checking out nature trails and streams. But we'd have those pizza picnics. But we really tried to want to know the hearts of our children. Today, I dare say, when I'm around my grandkids and others, man, the devices, the more of those that we have, just the more distractions it seems like we have. And it takes moral restraint, literally moral, saying I want to add to a situation and not cause suffering. I'm going to add goodness to put those things away. That can happen everywhere we go. It can be that way. The very thing that we can read a Bible with online, or that we can read a devotional, or we can read a good book, we can also be distracted and taken away from those very things, even to the point that we prevent a hazard when we do that while we're driving our cars. And we know better. We know we shouldn't do that. But, I've seen people literally walk into stop signs in a city when they're looking down at their phone, bang. We have to realize there's more things that we need to be present in this moment rather than on this thing. It's important to be present where we are, because present is where God speaks to you. Present is when you can hear. Present is when you're aware of others that we can give and love and share together. A third caution, we can think we're connected when we're really disconnected. That goes back to the first thing I saw about being dehumanized. We are not really friends just because we're online friends. Computers cannot take the place of a human. Just can't do it. A robot is not a human. Never will be. There was a movie that really touched this phenomenon. It was a very prescient movie called Lars and the Real Girl. I really recommend that movie. Ryan Gosling does a great job playing a simple-minded man who really doesn't do well socially, and he orders a doll. He orders this woman, and who is really just a doll. But because he can control it, love it, tell it what to do, how to be, he loves this doll. And he has to go through a psychological transformation and have emotional healing for him to be able to realize that's really not a human, and I need human contact, not something I can't control. And that's the danger of a virtual reality. When you're into a world that maybe you didn't create it, but it can turn out the way you want, we began to think that's what I want life to be. And that is dangerous because we're not in control. We have input, and we live in a world that God has made, but he did not make us to control it. The fifth caution is online is not in person. And I'm not referring to worship time, even though that could be an application of that. You may be in a great group online, but without in person, you don't really have connection. It goes back to the thing: if you're sick, who can take care of you? If you can share emotionally through a computer screen. You can do that somewhat, but if there's no give and take, the limitation of ProChat is I'm not talking to you and you're talking back to me. That's the thing I don't like about it. It is too impersonal for me. So those are some cautions. But now let me give you a few considerations, and with this we'll kind of close down our time tonight.
I only did 4.
What's that?
You only did 4.
Actually, the fifth one was that I really blended 2 and 4. Okay, so anyway, considerations. Moral does not mean right or wrong. Now, I touched on that a while ago. Moral means what does relieve or reduce suffering, and what does good. Right or wrong is a term we often use in medical considerations. And Ron, this does go to your question. When we come in and we'll say, is it right or wrong to have a DNR, a do not resuscitate option? It's not a matter of right or wrong. It is, will that reduce and relieve suffering? Will that be a choice that can bring... believe me, as a pastor, I've been in rooms where people are dying, where moms are dying, where dads are dying. A horrendous moral decision. They think it's moral, meaning that it's right or wrong. Can we take dad off life support? And the thing that I have to help people understand, removing from life support is not ending a life, because the life isn't there. It's making life go forward. And I can't tell you the anguish when families are divided about that. And it's important for us to think about issues that we don't normally deal in. But having the do not resuscitate, having the idea I don't want life support there, that's a critical thing. That if you make the decision, the doctor is bound by your decision if you are of sound mind, and it takes that pressure off your kids. It takes the pressure off your loved ones, off your spouse. That is a horrific issue that we need to understand. Moral doesn't mean right or wrong. What it means is, does it relieve and reduce suffering, and does it do good for others? It does good for others, and it relieves the suffering of the one who is in a place they would rather not be at that point, dependent upon a machine to be breathing. A second consideration: be gracious, be generous, and merciful when you're dealing with thorny medical issues. If we are not suffering ourselves, we can become insufferable when we offer advice that is not wise. In talking to parents who have not been able to have a child, and they're asking about questions of in vitro fertilization, or they're doing the other things, frozen eggs, and bringing that all those things, we need to understand there's not a, quote, moral right or wrong on that. It is not something to say, well, if God wanted me to have kids, that would just be the end of it. That would be like me saying, when I found out I had aortic stenosis, I could have said, well, my time's up. That's not necessarily true. And it doesn't mean that I did a moral wrong to go get a pig valve in my heart. That's not what it meant. What it meant was it extended life for me, and I take that to be good. I think my wife thinks that.
Yes.
She says so. But the thing is, those are decisions. My boys were concerned because I chose not to have an artificial valve. I chose instead to have the flesh valve. And I did that because I didn't want to have a diet change, and I didn't want to hear that clicking sound with an artificial. That would have driven me nuts, and I didn't need that. This has a limitation to it, but that's a risk I was willing to take. And I'm willing to do another procedure if we have to do that into the future. And I'm grateful that technology has made it such that that doesn't have to happen in the same way. They can do that through an arm today. And so this is where technology is a wonderful thing. We don't need to be afraid of it. But we do need to realize that we need to approach it with generosity and mercy and wisdom. A third thing: be humble when we think about technology. We live in a technological age, and we have embraced technological advance with pretty much abandon. A writer, Neil Postman, I read an article where he coined a phrase, technopoly. And he says it's where technology of every kind is cheerfully granted sovereignty. You just say, I want the latest of this, I want the latest of that. And theologically, a theologian, Jacques Ellul, back in the 60s, he said, at least you think the process of technology is designed to serve human ends. But is it really? Is that right? We're not sure about those things. But I will say this: technology is not supreme. Technology is an invention that humans use to make life better, but they can make it worse. Back in World War II, the Nazi regime used technology. They did medical exploration in horrific ways, and they destroyed life and they hurt life to see how far things could go. We can't just say if it's technologically sound, it's good. We have to understand that technology comes from two Greek words. Technique is the word, and what that was, it was a technician, a person who was a craftsman, who knew how to put things together well. So that word was there, technikes. And then the word techne was art, or the skill that they did. But then it's added to another word, and that word is logos. Technology. The logos is used biblically, not in every other way, but biblically it is used to talk about the divine principle of life. Jesus is the logos. I am the word of life. In the beginning was the word, the logos. And it's the defining definition of what God would want life to be. Is to be like Christ. When you take technology and you put those together, those are two words that moderns have no trouble sticking together. But people in the ancient world, they would never have put those things together because they would have said the Logos rules the Technos. They would not say the Technos rules the Logos. They are not joined. And what it's saying is that humanity is under a divine order. We're under wisdom. So we've put together words that intimate that humans can shape the order of the world. And through technology, we may say it's neutral. It's often not. We want it to be beneficial. And it needs to always have a reverence to that. And that's where I would close today, to say, be reverent. Be wise, be understanding, be humble, be generous, but be reverent. Be aware of the holy. There is, there's a biblical story. It's a great story. It's an epic story. It's one of the great tales of the Bible. It starts in the very beginning. It says that there were trees in the garden, and the Lord God told Adam, the man, and his wife, Eve, you may eat of any tree in the garden except one. There's one you can't do. Now, all the trees were good for food. Apparently, all of them. But one was not to be touched. The others were to be embraced fully. But one was not to be touched. There was a reverence to that. Adam and Eva, the man, the woman, the living one, they choose to take life into their own hands. And we see it didn't end well. It made a condition that had to be reconciled and had to be restarted. So in this discussion, I wanted to lay a foundation somewhat before we talk about some of the particular issues that Ron brought in his question. And next round, we will look at specific particulars on the fact of how do we approach some of these issues. But I think the guidelines tonight, the cautions, and then the considerations will help us have a foundation where we can go forward. It's been a joy to be with you tonight. And Ron, I have to tell you, you made me book it and study. And I've got several books that I have never read that I started reading today. And since getting your question late in the week, last week even. But listen, I loved getting your questions. You guys send in questions and we will tackle them. We will not evade the questions you ask. And Ron, if you've got some follow-ups to give me to be more specific, I'll be glad to answer those as well. Charlie, it's been a joy to have you tonight. I don't know who else is with us tonight. Not sure. Gerald, you're here. It's good to have you tonight. And I want next time to bring in hopefully some more biblical base on these things. Let me give you one verse as we close tonight. In 1 Chronicles chapter 12, this verse is a verse that I've hearkened to many times through the years. But it says this in verse 32. It's numbering the people and saying who is in what tribe. And in verse 32, it says, from the tribe of Issachar, that was one of the sons of Jacob, there were 200 leaders of the tribe with their relatives. All of these men understood the signs of the times, and they knew what Israel should do. They knew the best course of action. The sons of Issachar, they were the wise, who understood what direction do we go. And that gives me encouragement today. Everybody doesn't have to know, but we need some faithful guides that we can trust. Our trust has been diminished in governmental institutions at times, sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly. In political leaders, we've had our hearts dashed at times and sometimes lifted. Our medical resources with the pandemic, we're saying what is right, make up your mind. And all of these things show the incredible complexity, because we think we know. And every time that the CDC would give something out, they were doing the best they knew, but then it changed. And that lets us know there's a everlasting, eternal wisdom we need. There is the one that says, I, the Lord God, changeth not. and you can trust me. My word endures forever. He does not tell us what to do in every situation. The divine does not presuppose to say, do this, 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 and this. That's not the way the divine operates. But the divine does tell us this. You can do all things if you depend upon the Messiah, who is your life. You can do all things through Christ, who loved you and gave himself for you. We can do all things in his wisdom, in his strength. And so we have to learn to apply. And that means we will be humble, and at the same time we will be active. And we will not be afraid of the tests we face. Well, our God is good. He's good all the time. And all the time he is good. It has been a joy to be with you tonight. God bless you. Stay warm. And let's keep warm in heart as we walk with God in the days ahead. God bless.